Today's discussion will address the two approaches to regulating competition in digital markets, looking to draw out what are some of the key similarities and differences and the impact they may have on consumers and businesses alike.
So there's obviously quite some pros in using antitrust law or competition law and enforcement in digital markets. The case-by-case approach allows tailoring to specific market conditions, specific market circumstances. It tends to be, I would think, more precise than a more regulatory approach, which obviously has to work with more broad brush obligations and prohibitions. It allows, as you all know, for an effects analysis in the specific circumstances of the case. It also allows for evoking efficiencies. But there's also drawbacks that one has to realize that competition law cannot solve it all in digital markets and is not adapted to all of the problems that have been mentioned in all of the reports on.
We, in writing our own sort of making recommendations for something that we potentially might take forward, we needed to set ourselves some constraints, some clear principles, and we set 5 principles in all. But just, I think the 2 most important ones were on the first was that it should be evidence-driven and effects-based, and the second was that it should be proportionate and targeted.
These business models are so vastly different depending on what company we are talking about here, and the obligations fleshed out in Article 5 and Article 6 seem to be very crude and not very nuanced, and they seem to be very much based on past case law practice, whereas these business models, they develop all the time. Here we are talking about a market that is extremely innovative, extremely dynamic.
Dynamic and static efficiency trade-off. We're talking about highly dynamic markets. It's hard to predict what are the trade-offs going to be. And if we're shifting, and I do think the CMA approach does a better job of protecting the consumer interests and making sure that those two are balanced.
For me, it's much more about, have you really considered the trade-off of imposing regulation? I mean, you have to be careful what we wish for. I'm working as a senior advisor for the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. And I mean, we are a heavily regulated industry, and the unintended consequences of PSD2 is in full flesh. And I'm just wondering whether we have thought about the unintended consequences of this regulation.
This isn't about getting rid of the platforms at all. It's about actually they provide extremely good services. We all know this. The counterfactual that we all want to see is more competitive platforms and a wider and stronger, more sustained tech sector that itself will deliver those benefits to consumers.
I just want to encourage you actually all to participate in this dialogue that's ongoing. I think we're not yet there. There's a proposal out in terms of the DMA. This will need to be fine-tuned and will certainly be fine-tuned along the way.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. And Daniel, we'll end with you. What's a good outcome for you in 10, 20 years' time, looking back at today?
It's surprising. I mean, I very much agree with Thomas's final comment about sort of engagement. We are writing a playbook, our own playbooks alongside, in a really important landscape.